Awesome. Welcome back to the Kinetic Spine and Sport podcast. I get to play host again for a fifth time, so episode 5.
Nice.
Which is a nice box to check. I'm Dr. Luke. I own Kinetic Spine and Sport right next door. And again, thanks to the Moondogs production crew for letting us utilize their studio, put on some fun stuff like this, and just literally see what happens. So today my guest is TJ Spence. You might recognize the name or the last name because in episode 2 we had Autumn Spence. That would be his other half, which I'll let him talk about. But he's the owner-operator of Maverick Fitness over by B-Dubs, which is a good combination, a gym and a sports bar, right? Yeah, I'll let you talk about the gym space just a little bit, and then we'll just kind of get into, we kind of have a topic of nutrition to talk about, but we're going to just talk through some other stuff.
Sure.
So tell us about Maverick Fitness first. Yeah.
Well, we got in there a little over a year ago, and, it's a fully functioning fitness center. It's all your weights, cardio, cables, free weights, all that kind of stuff. We're open 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Tanning bed, towel service, kind of fun little goodies like that. But it's real convenient. There's we do just month-to-month memberships. You just pay your monthly dues. There's no extra fees or anything like that. So pretty simple.
Yeah, simple's nice.
Yeah,
right.
Keep it easy.
Cool. And then within the space, what do you kind of do there?
Everything. It's basically me running it right now. I do everything from the cleaning and the towel, laundry, and all that stuff, all the way up to all the personal training and billing and membership sales and all that stuff. So if you come over there, I'm your guy.
Yeah.
I kind of live over there. So.
Next to the tanning bed is also a bed, and that's where that's funny. I remember, and TJ is good friends with the previous owner of Kinetic Spine and Sport, Dr. Casey, who's down in Iowa. But I remember talking to Casey about small business stuff and what's it like to run a clinic, and one of the comments that he made is, I've slept there a couple times. And I think that gives people a really transparent example of if you're a small business owner, you just got some days where you're in the
winter, you're shoveling the entryway and just make it happen.
Yeah, cool. So off of that a little bit, explain how the personal training stuff, I guess, looks on your end. So because every trainer kind of approaches it differently from a time perspective. How do people get connected to that process?
Sure. Generally what happens is somebody comes in asking about a membership, and then, one of two ways. Either they come in asking for a membership or they've been referred by a previous or current client.
Yep.
But either way, it generally starts with, a consultation. We just do that for free where, sit down and kind of have a chat like this about what they're looking to get out of a fitness program, and generally talk about, what they've been doing for nutrition, any previous exercise, injuries, any of that kind of thing that we'd need to work around. And then from there, it just kind of comes down to fitting a program for their goals as far as, how often they want to come in. Most of my people come in 3 days a week for half an hour, Monday, Wednesday, Friday, something like that. Then they have, extra stuff they'll come in and do on their own as well. But it'll be anywhere from 1 to 5 days a week for half hour or an hour, just depending on what they're trying to do and how much they want to put into it. And then from there, it's just it's all 100% customized for that person. It's it's the whole gamut of people, high school athletes up to literally people in their 80s, just trying to avoid the decline, right?
Sure. Yep.
Just try to keep mobile and keep moving and keep enjoying life. And then everything in between, obviously a lot of weight loss and people trying to build a little muscle and all that stuff. So it's the individual experience is very different from person to person based on what they're looking for, because it's just totally customized.
Yeah. How does that work for you? Like, and I ask this from a very similar perspective, right? Because some people come into my space either pain related, function related, whatever that may be. And part of my job is to sometimes like fish the goal out of them, because not everybody has a health goal, right? And I think, in years previous, back in my earlier clinic years, people would come in and I found myself having like a preconceived goal for them of like, oh man, I want to see this person do this and I want to see this person do that. And what I've learned over the years is it doesn't matter what I think, right? Like it's really up to that person. So, how do you do a good job of, meeting them in that space? Because the feedback that I get from a lot of your clients that overlap with me or that I know is they feel super connected with you going through that process, where they feel like they can just show up and say, here's what I got, here's who I am, here's what I want to do. And not every personal trainer can do that. You know what I mean?
Sure. It's a problem with newer trainers for sure. And I've been, so this is year 22 for me being a personal trainer. So old guy.
Wisdom.
When I first started, I'm not sure that I really projected what I like to do onto people, but what I had a problem with was I had been training myself a certain way for multiple years. I started lifting weights when I was 13 to try and fix a knee problem, and then ended up getting hooked on exercise, fitness, strength training, all that kind of stuff. And then in college, thought it'd just be a fun part-time job. I was in the gym all the time anyways, and at that point, I had already been lifting weights for 8 years or so, and it was always a little bit more strength oriented, that kind of thing. And I remember my first client was he was a professor there. I forget what he taught, but he was big into tennis, and he wanted to start training to be better at tennis.
Wanted better backhand.
And so, and he was probably early 30s, something like that.
Sure.
Hadn't really ever done any specific fitness work before. And, I was freshly certified, first client, first person I was training other than myself.
Yeah.
And he showed up day one, and, we started doing some, like, more sport-specific kind of stuff. I kind of went through the book and tried to figure out, like, all right, what was a good tennis player guy?
Right.
And then I kind of had a light bulb moment of, oh, this guy just needs to start at square one.
Sure.
Right?
Sure.
3 sets of 10 of basic stuff, get some basic strength and conditioning, and then work into all that stuff. And, the first few people you work with, you kind of figure out they don't really teach you that in your certifications, right?
Oh.
And so a
or
lot
in
of
school
that,
sometimes.
yeah. I think it's better now.
Yeah.
University of Minnesota was one of the first ones that had a kinesiology program, which I went through.
Yep.
But now there are actual, like in the exercise science departments, they'll have a actual personal training emphasis in it. So it's actually come quite a long ways, I think. So, and really, at the time, what we were doing was pretty ahead of the pack for what was going on nationally. But I think it's gotten even better since then. So maybe they do a better job of that now really getting some experience before you start actually working. But at the time, that's how it was. You kind of just got thrown in the fire and had to figure out how to apply everything you knew correctly. And that was probably the biggest problem. And I've certainly seen that with staff over the years, that new trainers get going. And that's the biggest thing. It's just trying to figure out where to start somebody, and once you get started, it kind of builds from there pretty organically.
Yeah.
But figuring out the right place to start is difficult. And you get somebody that says they come in and they're like, oh yeah, I'm in pretty good shape, and so you think, okay, I'm gonna have to work this person,
Right.
And then they're not really in that good of shape. And then you get people that say that, oh no, I got a lot of work to do, and they're in phenomenal shape.
Sure.
So it's you kind of have to learn how to read people a little bit, and sort of start simple and let it build from there.
Do you, and kind of the school stuff with working in the exercise science department program up at MSU, and just talking to those students within there, I know that like throughout the year in certain courses, like they have projects where they have to like fitness plan for people, come up with programs, whether they're using each other as, guinea pigs on that, which most programs do for most things. That's what we did in chiropractic school. But it is cool to see like more and more application of stuff instead of just saying, hey, here's what the book says, understand the numbers, understand
generally
science.
The book doesn't really say much. It tells you a bunch of exercise physiology, and then it's kind of up to you to figure it out, you know. So I think they're doing a much better job of it these days than it used to be. Yeah.
And with that, it sounds like there's a little bit of like a learning curve through the process, right? Like you kind of have to figure out, okay, this person said, I'm not in great shape, and then they get in there and they're just throwing weights around like nothing, or vice versa, right? So it's like sometimes you have to collect a couple data points before you can like roll out the plan, you know what I mean?
Yep.
And I face the same thing in the clinic where, there's a lot of different things that we can do treatment-wise. Everybody responds to things different.
Sure.
And so sometimes if it's a more complicated case, I'll kind of come up front and tell them, like, we got 5 different options for this. This is what I think is a good option 1. If I get this wrong, I'll learn from getting it wrong. And then, like, the plan is always changeable. And I think that's where young clinicians get stuck, probably young personal trainers get stuck, where they think, I already planned out 4 weeks for this person, and then they come in and they kind of fumble the first day, and it's like, nope, we're just gonna stick to it, when really if you can just tweak it a little bit, probably can catch them a little better.
I've kind of evolved into initially a consultation and then a free workout, and it's a workout. It's not it's more kind of just a evaluation for me to see how people move and where their strength is at and how their cardio is and that kind of stuff. And sometimes that is plenty of a workout for people, but that little evaluation process just kind of helps make the first real workout a little smoother, a little more dialed in. That's that kind of evolved from the way the industry works in general. Is you get a membership somewhere and they give you a free session with a trainer, and that session with the trainer is that trainer's opportunity to sell you some training, which is like kind of a double-edged sword, because you can't, to help somebody, they need to buy personal training, right? They got to become a client to be able to really help them,
right?
But it kind of leads you down a path of trying to, I guess, impress people or something like that with what you're trying to do. And over the course of years of working through that, I really found out that just doing some simple stuff and connecting with people on a person-to-person basis and that kind of thing really did a better job of both selling the training, but then also just getting them started off right, and not where they were crushed from their intro workout, right? And then didn't want to come back. So the process kind of evolved for me over the years.
And I think that's where where it's probably a a trickier situation, like within the CrossFit world, right? Or something
Sure.
like that, where someone's like, yeah, I just want to try it out. I'm going to jump into a class. Well, you're in a class, full of people that might be their third or fourth time there this week, and they've gone through the process. So all you do is you see these people going 100 miles an hour through the class, and you're just like, I got to just keep up.
Yeah,
and then
that's
they
true.
end up getting kind of buried in the group class, and then sometimes discouraged.
Sure.
Right, where it's like,
Sometimes people are inspired by that, and some people get discouraged by it.
yeah,
It's interesting.
yeah. So and like the same thing kind of plays out on your end, where some people are going to be impressed by just a unique lift or a fun set of something.
Sure.
And other people are going to like be confused by it. They're like, I don't know what's going on. So it's so interesting how so much of it just comes back to like that connecting portion. And it seems so simple and it seems so like silly. But again, it like plays out over and over again.
It does.
Over time.
Yep.
So, and that's, I think in the clinical world, they're also circling back to that, where when I'm talking with chiropractic students, or other faculty people, like they're really trying to like double down on that, because it's like treatment can progress so far. There's like, ooh, look at all these new things. Here's a fancy way to do this or a fancy way to do that. And you can get so caught up in like that stuff where you like leave the patient or the client in the dust.
Sure.
And then they're like, I don't want to do this anyways. So like it's way more centered on that.
Yep. Well, I mean, that's I see that a lot with chit-chatting with clients and stuff about their doctors. At Mayo or Mankato Clinic or whatever it is. Chiropractic wouldn't be any different. There's doctors that make you feel like a number, and there's doctors that actually take time to talk to you and connect to you, and they remember, they look at a chart and they remember, here's this person I saw 6 months ago or whatever,
Right.
and actually put a little bit more time and effort into that and connect with people, and people want to stay with those doctors.
For sure.
When you walk in and get treated like a number, man, I had an appointment with blah, 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 I got to see somebody else. You know what I mean?
Right.
So, the connection is definitely huge.
Yeah, and
All areas.
it can be so big where it can totally like negate the technicality part, right? Like someone could be, a fantastic chiro or a fantastic surgeon or whatever. Like they could be the best technical person for that. But if, whether you call it bedside manner or just connectability, can totally, direct people away, and like now you don't even have a chance to do the thing that you're good at.
Sure. Yep.
So
I've always felt that 90% of why personal training is good for people is just because it helps them show up. And, they got to look forward to coming to see you. And they know it's going to be work. Right? So it's, when they've got that appointment on their calendar and they actually look forward to doing it, and it's a get to, not a got to.
Yeah.
That makes a huge difference.
Yeah. Are there, so off of that kind of note, I think it was 2-ish years ago, I got to teach a random psychology class at MSU, which is still one of the funniest things that I've ever got asked to do. But it was a behavioral psychology course within their exercise science program. So it's not like I'm out in left field. But when I was talking to them about teaching it, they basically just said, like, well, you work with patients and clients every day. You talk about behavior. So if you can read through this book, you're going to be just fine. And then just kind of threw me into the fire. But one of the cool things, right, and it's still one of the funnest classes that I taught. And yeah, that could be its whole other conversation topic. But one of the cool things that I learned through that process is, from the psychology perspective, there's so many different ways where you can like connect and motivate people. And I wish I remembered all the things that were on the page, but it was like, there's like 30 plus separate categories that you can use to like encourage people. Like like gamifying things, right? Like if you make it a game, make it enjoyable, super fun for them. If you can, make it a part of a list, super good for them. If you can make it a part of a like collective support group, good for them. If you can reward them in certain ways, good for them.
Sure.
And it made me think like, holy crap, there's like this giant checklist that if I just figure out which one of these boxes actually matters to that person, I can do that.
Sure.
And then you can really shift the perspective on it. So I guess my question with that is, what are some of the things that you notice are successful when it comes to helping people like find a rhythm, find the buy-in, like what pieces do you find yourself like consistently doing with them?
Sure. I think the biggest thing is just finding the why. So, people all come in and like, yeah, I want to lose 20 pounds or whatever it is. And well, why do you want to do that?
Right.
And, a lot of times you get a quick answer of, well, I just want to look better, or I want to be a little bit better at pickleball, or it could be something like that. But as you get talking to them a little bit more, it usually comes out that it's something a little more significant of, oh, I had a bad doctor's visit. I need to get my blood pressure down, or something like that. When you start to get those deeper answers, then you can kind of always relate things back to that of, this is how this is going to help you do this. Or, if people start to drop the ball in the nutrition size, you can relate it back to, you got to be doing blah, 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 blah to get X, Y, and Z to happen, and just kind of being able to always bring it back to, they call it the significant emotional experience. There's usually something that triggers somebody to go from thinking about it to actually taking action. There's generally some type of something that happened.
Like a catalyst.
I had a lady in North Carolina who was on a ladder in her garage, and she was significantly overweight, and her 3 or 4-year-old was scared that she was going to break the ladder and get hurt. And she came to the gym the next day. She's like, I got to do something.
Yeah.
Right. So there's always something that motivated somebody to take action to get to the gym, and it's kind of about figuring out whatever that is. And when you can, then you can really do a lot more to help them get the end result they want, because it's not easy.
For sure. Yeah. Right. Like if it was easy, everybody would do it. If it was enjoyable or like a natural thing, then like gyms would be packed full of people, and nobody would struggle with physical stuff. But like that's not the reality. Like it is hard to do that.
Sure.
And that's similar in my world where people can put up with pain for a long time. There's some people that literally put up with pain their whole life and decide it's not bad enough, so I'm just not going to do anything about it. And you can still, live a full life with pain and still possibly be just fine. But like there's just some people that choose to do that. But there's often something that happens along that timeline that someone's like, nah, actually, I don't want to miss out on that, or I want to be able to do that. And like a recent example that I had, I can't remember if I talked about it on a previous episode, but this young dad got some kids at home, and his shoulder's been bugging him since like February, just like general soreness, a new type of thing, but he's fine throughout most of the day except when he goes to throw something. And like the kids asked him, hey, will you come throw the football to us in the backyard? And he went outside and made one throw and said it felt like his arm was going to just like fall off. And that was kind of the trigger. Yeah, right. But he said that was kind of the triggering thing for him, where he's like, well, I plan on being an involved dad. Like, I want to be able to do the things. And not only has this pain just been lingering, but now it's getting in the way of, like, a meaningful moment. And then you basically pluck that and say, okay, that's our reason for doing this. Like, let's let that be the fuel and the direction, and then just put in the work for it.
Yep.
But it like you said, people don't necessarily come out and say that right away.
Yep.
You kind of have to talk through the layers, listen through the layers, and then, when people kind of bring up something that I feel is a little more important than maybe they relay it,
Mm-hmm.
I always try and ask more questions around that
And
circle.
you tease it out.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So, yeah, cool. Well, within that, I know you mentioned nutrition being a thing, and that's kind of something that we were going to circle back to.
Sure.
And part of where that started on my end is when I was talking to Autumn. I just asked how does it work to you run a gym, your husband to run a gym, you guys have some kids, you do the life thing, and then she's also a really good high level athlete.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it was the first thing that she said was well, my husband's a great cook, and if we didn't have him, managing the food nutrition for us, she's like, I don't know what we would do with that.
That's funny because I feel like cooking is the biggest hang up for people with nutrition.
Yeah.
So many people just rely on eating out and eating pre-prepared meals from the store, whatever.
Yeah.
It's so much easier to do it right if you just cook your own food.
Yeah.
And that gets interesting in our house because she and I eat very differently.
Sure.
With the way she trains, she's much more of a high carb kind of person, which, she trains pretty intensely, pretty frequently, a couple times a day, every day of the week, basically.
Mm-hmm.
So, she needs that to
Mm-hmm.
be able to maintain a high level of intensity. And, I lift weights, I do some cardio, I don't do anything
Mm-hmm.
super intense, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so I tend to do better with a lower carbohydrate diet, but the biggest thing that I notice with us is just being prepared.
Totally.
Right?
Totally.
It's, well, for anybody getting started on a nutrition program, I'll expand that to two things. The number one thing that affects how successful you're going to be with any type of a nutrition plan is adherence.
Mm-hmm.
What can you stick with long enough
Right.
to see the result and be happy enough to stick to it?
Right.
Right?
Yeah. Enough is the key word there. Right?
Yeah. And so adherence is number one, but then beyond that is preparation.
Mm.
Beyond all the calories, carbs, fats, all that stuff, those two things I think are the most important keys to success with nutrition. Do you know who Dan John is?
Mm-mm.
He was one of the... He still is. He's a cool guy. He was a throwing coach in college and was a thrower himself and weightlifter. And off the top of my head, I can't remember what college he was at. I think he high school as well. But he was kind of one of the first internet fitness strength guys, and is still around. And
Awesome.
he's got some great one-liners. And one of his big tips on nutrition was, if you do the dozen eggs a day diet and you buy 2 dozen eggs, you're screwed on day 3. Right?
Yeah. Right.
And you kind of have to think about it that way. And it seems like the protein side of things is the hardest part for people. Where if you get home and it's 5:30 and there isn't some type of meat or protein available to start eating, you start cooking and it takes 20 minutes, and then you start eating everything else in the cabinet. And then by the time that's done, you probably don't need to eat anymore, but then you eat it because you just cooked it, and now you just ended up overeating.
Right.
Yeah. So being prepared and knowing those things are going to come up and having a plan for how to counteract that is really a big part of staying with it and being successful with it.
Sure. When you're talking to your clients about that, because it makes me think like, well, we're shooting for something that's routine, right? Like something repeatable, something that fits kind of the rhythm of the week. What do you end up finding, like, if someone comes back and says, hey, this really worked for me, what do they typically like say when it comes to that?
It's so different with everybody. People have just such different habits. And I have to say, I've kind of, in the last year or so, I've kind of gotten away from saying you should have, this many grams of protein per day, this many grams of carbs, this many grams of fat, this many total calories, like doing all that kind of stuff, and have simplified it to protein and calories. And that seems to have been a good change. So most people just don't get nearly enough protein, especially when they start working out.
Sure.
When people go through their day of eating with me, it's like, well, you've got like 60 grams of protein here. Which, for somebody that doesn't work out and maybe they're smaller or something, that might be okay. But you certainly see better results with getting the protein up from a couple of standpoints. For one, it keeps you feeling fuller longer, right? Just the satiety of it is much higher than specifically carbohydrates. But just focusing on a good protein number for the day, break that up into 3 meals, eat that first. Whatever the protein is, if it's chicken breast or steak or whatever, have that portion ready to go. Eat that first at your meal. Don't eat anything else until you're done with your protein. And then everything else kind of just works itself out.
Sure.
So usually start there, and then people usually see some results initially. That'll stall out. Then we'll start to add, say, well, let's keep track of your total calories now too.
Sure.
So they'll stay with the protein and then figure out where their calories are at on a daily basis. And it's kind of interesting. When they do that and they eat, a little bit of this and a little bit of that to get their calories for the day, at the end of the week, their carbs and fats sort of work themselves out to where they should be anyways. One day might be a little high on fat, one day might be a little high on carbs, but at the end of the week, it sort of evens out.
Yeah.
So it's not really worth worrying about.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Totally.
Then from there, some people do better on higher carb stuff. Some people do better on lower carb stuff. It's just a matter of trial and error and figuring out kind of what makes somebody tick. Like I mentioned, Autumn and I are a great example. We eat very differently. When I eat carbs, I'm hungry all the time. I can do it like a standard bodybuilder diet, the chicken, rice, broccoli kind of, if you think like that sort of a diet. I can do it, but man, I just constantly, I finish one meal and I think, when do I get to eat again? And I tend to overeat and I have a harder time sticking to what I'm trying to do. She doesn't have that problem. And she burns through the carbs and it works great for her. So she stays lean and athletic year round. With what I'd call kind of a standard bodybuilder diet.
Sure.
Versus I'm much more protein and fat heavy and keep the carbs down, and then my hunger's kind of in check and I don't really think about food. I eat till I'm full twice a day and that's that.
Yep.
I don't really have to worry about it beyond that.
Yeah, and I think nutrition is one of those things that is just overcomplicated in so many different ways. And part of that is, like, if you Google anything nutrition-wise or search nutrition on Instagram or whatever, right, you're immediately, like, bombarded with all sorts of things. And I'm sure within it, there's good bits somewhere.
There are, but there's a lot of noise.
Yeah. And like combing through that can be exhausting, or like I feel like very rarely is it successful.
Sure. there's a lot of noise and there's a lot of pitches.
Yeah.
Trying to sell a supplement or trying to, this or that.
Yep.
But yeah, that's something else within the last year or so. I've really kind of given up on nutrition science. It's one of those fields of study where you can look anything up and get two completely opposite answers.
Mm-hmm.
And then when you look into it, it kind of just depends on who paid for it.
Yeah. Yep.
But nobody looks into it that far.
No, that's a lot of steps.
And a lot of it's just epidemiology correlation studies that don't really mean a whole lot.
Right.
But the news or whatever presents it like it's just cold hard fact, and it just really isn't.
Yeah. There was an interesting study that just came out probably within the last month or so, in one of the big, like, I can't remember if it was in the Spinal Journal or a big pain science one, but one of the huge, like, reputable ones for those of us that are in, like, spinal care pain management stuff. And the study was basically taking a step back and looking at all the previous research that shows, ooh, this procedure is really good for people, and this procedure is really good for people, and ooh, when we do this medication, this is really good for people. And it showed all of these positive, impactful treatments. And then when they took a step back and said, okay, we've learned all these new really good things, how is that affecting the general population, and like how much we struggle with back pain? And when you step back and look at the big picture, like, it's all the same.
Mm-hmm.
And so the question in that paper was, how can we say all of these things are so great when we look at, like, the bottom line, and the bottom line hasn't changed?
Sure.
And it was a cool way of them subtly saying, like, maybe there's a little bit of BS in all of that. And maybe we should not get so hyped up about new things or, trendy things or things that haven't even had enough time to play out naturally.
Yeah.
Before we double down on stuff. And are there other things that, like, we can reach back to that have kind of lasted the test of time?
Sure.
And like get back to focusing on some of the things that are more simple and straightforward. And I feel like that theme translates into a lot of different
certainly
health spaces, nutrition being one of them, where
nutrition,
it's like,
for sure.
Where it's like, oh man, we have all these new things, but like the data isn't great, the general population is not getting healthier, all that stuff. So it's like maybe we need to detach from certain things and just get back to, like, oh yeah, well that just makes sense. So we just need to pretend that the things that make sense are also sexy. Right? And like just do it that way.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yep.
So I feel like in the science world in general, we're just going through an interesting phase with that stuff and understanding the depths of some bias that's within it. And you kind of just have to, like, keep your head down and stick to what's been working and really communicate and encourage people, like, I know that they made all these claims, but like this is just the consistent. Let's just be okay with consistent.
Yeah, was it the NIH? I don't know,
Could
15 years ago or something, did a study to see if they did too many studies, and they determined that they do too many studies?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sure. There's just so much irony with that stuff. Yeah, that's funny.
So yeah, and then I'm curious, talking about nutrition. I've been curious if you notice, and I don't know how often it happens, but if you notice somebody making any kind of a dietary change, does it affect their pain management, chronic joint pain, any of that kind of stuff? Sure.
Yeah, so I think what makes pain so fascinating is to say that it's multifactored is a huge understatement. Like, there's just so many different things that go into how our bodies perceive pain. And like general health markers are a part of that. You know, kind of going back to the idea of like there's studies that show it one way versus the other. You know, I remember hearing like a study in the past that was done on people that were obese, and how do people with obesity compare to like the general public when it comes to like pain, because they wanted to say like, well, your low back hurts because you're overweight. And what I remember from the study was they actually couldn't correlate that.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not as like direct of like, yep, if you're overweight, you're going to feel more pain. However, we know that like adipose tissue and, you know, the chemicals within that stuff, there's a chemistry component to it.
Well, especially visceral fat.
Right. And so what it kind of comes down to is like, I think the nutrition side plays a huge chemical role into inflammation, how your body metabolizes things. Because again, like the brain at all times is just taking a huge 10,000 foot look at the body as a whole system. And so pain is just one of the really good alarms that it has. So like, you know, people can get pain when they have an upset stomach. It's like, well, that's not necessarily a physical thing. It could be a, you know, visceral thing like that. But there's pieces of it where, and I wish I could look up more of the studies for it, but like there's a reason why they recommend anti-inflammatory diets to people. Like there's a reason why that is a normal thing. Probably the biggest hang up with that is what you pointed out before, is the adherence to a program like that. But I feel like from a pain sensitivity level, like I've seen it make a difference for some people. It's just rare, because it's rare for people to make that change in general. So that's part of why on like my end, I don't dig too deep into it, because I understand that if I want someone to make a huge nutritional change, like it's going to be an uphill battle, and I don't necessarily have the tools to help them get there either. But it's like when people can make those changes, and for some people it might not be a huge change, right? Like they just might need to tweak something here or there. You know, like I've had a number of people come in and say, hey, I haven't drank pop in a month, and like I feel better. I'm less sore, I'm less groggy, I'm less foggy, like my movement is better. And really like the one big change that they can at least focus on is drinking less pop. You know, we know that if someone is making one positive healthy change, there's a good chance that they're making other ones unconsciously. Right? It's like when people go to the gym, they probably don't finish a session with you and then drive through McDonald's on the way home. Right? So there's...
Although, I do have a couple that might do that kind of thing once in a while.
yeah. Time and place, right? Moderation is the model for that.
Everything in moderation, especially moderation.
Yeah, exactly. But I also learned that through that behavior psychology course. Like, people tend to stack habits, whether it's in a good direction or a bad direction. So it's hard to say, like, oh, just because they stopped drinking pop, they felt better. But if that's kind of a key thing for them, then I like to be like, there's a piece to it in there somewhere. So I kind of answer that question.
Yeah, I think that's interesting.
Yeah.
And the reason I was curious about it was because I've noticed it with myself. Whenever I've been kind of on a standard American diet, which I'd say my version of a standard American diet is probably better than the actual standard American diet, but just when I'm kind of eating whatever, pizza on the weekends, and not really paying attention to anything, just kind of eating. I always, am training as well. I'm always lifting weights and doing runs or whatever, that kind of thing. But I always notice that when I go from that to could probably be anything else, but I usually go from that to more of a kind of an animal-based keto type diet. That's kind of my go-to for if I'm trying to lean up or just feel better. I always feel better when I eat that way.
Yep.
I always have less joint pain and soreness. And there was one time specifically I was struggling with just one little spot in my lower back, and I think it was more soft tissue. Like whenever I'd get adjusted, it just didn't really. You know, I mean, everything moved better, but it just didn't quite touch that spot. And it had been bugging me for 6 months. And by bugging, like it was kind of just always there. It didn't really impede me from doing anything. It was just sort of always there.
Yep.
Like somebody just sticking their finger right there. You know,
exactly.
it's just there. And so I made this switch where, all right, time to get serious again. And then get back to eating the way I like to. It was about day 5. I was just gone. It was like, to your point, that was really the change.
Right.
I was still training the same. I was still doing other things the same. But just basically, for me, getting the carbohydrates down.
Sure.
And the calories under control. And better quality food. And back pain was gone.
Yep. Yeah,
and stayed gone.
Yeah, and you know, it makes me think from a metabolism standpoint, right? Like the body kind of runs like a furnace, right? Where like no matter what goes into it, it's going to metabolize, and you're going to get some type of energy from it. And there's different things that seem to determine like how well our body metabolizes stuff and breaks it down. And I think where this kind of connects to the pain thing is there's certain people that have different food sensitivities. And I've heard of people kind of talk about like, well, you know, before I started getting more fit or healthy, or before I got my health to level up a little bit, I'd always been sensitive to like this type of food. I've always reacted this way to this type of food. And since getting healthier, they see that like certain food sensitivities kind of like go away. And to me, like that also kind of links into that pain, like irritation cycle, where it's like, sure, certain foods may make people more sensitive to stuff. I wonder if that person was just a step healthier, right? Would they have the same response to it? Because I've heard people talk through that a couple of times, and the thing that changed for them is like they just got healthier. They still are eating the same stuff that they had been, but now they find like, well, their body can handle or manage the food better. Which I just thought was always interesting. So it's like I don't like to talk about people and comparing them to like cars, right? Like, we're not just mechanical. However, like there are mechanical components of like, well, if your car runs better, it's gonna do better. If you take care of things, like it's gonna be easier to maneuver and manage. The body's kind of similar. Like you can take someone that's a little bit more fit and healthy, and they're probably gonna, just from a baseline standpoint, handle activity better. And I think that's like the value that people miss, you know, just with like little steps of progress. So I don't know, it makes me think through that sensitivity pain stuff, because I've heard people kind of have that story. When you're talking with people about making certain changes within that, like what are some suggestions that you make for them? You know, if you're finding like, okay, when this person eats this way, they feel this way. Do you just strictly like, hey, we're just going to simplify it and break it down to this? Or are you going to say, okay, this is what you eat, or this is what you tell me you eat. Let's change like this piece.
So, like I mentioned, I like to start with the protein. And kind of make that the first change. And kind of by default, if you eat more of something, you eat less of something else.
Mm-hmm.
So if somebody is, kind of they eat a lot of Doritos or whatever, if they're already full from eating some steak,
Mm-hmm.
then they end up eating less Doritos.
Sure.
Right? So I like to start there. And then it can go a bunch of different directions from that, depending on the person.
Sure.
But yeah, I generally have people keep a food log, at least for a while, or if we get stuck.
Sure.
For a week, log everything you do. I don't usually worry too much about how much of this or that, but just kind of get a good sample of what everybody's eating. And then kind of coach from there. And I mean, obviously, I try to steer people towards a more whole foods
Mm-hmm.
approach.
Sure.
Most of my people are with me for some amount of weight loss. It's a lot harder to be overweight eating whole foods.
Mm-hmm. For sure.
They're more filling, so you just don't get as much energy and you're full. Actually, I heard a great analogy on this. A family-sized bag of Doritos is 17 ounces. So if you ate a 17-ounce steak, would you finish it and say, hey, bring me another 17-ounce steak? Because I could eat the 17-ounce bag of Doritos and be like, where's the next bag? Bring it on, right?
Right.
So that's kind of what I mean about just kind of
Yeah.
trying to get more of the good stuff in and don't focus as much on keeping the bad stuff out, because there will just be less room for it.
Sure.
And then as you see people's patterns change and their habits change, at some point they eventually, they feel pretty good doing what they're doing, and then they say, oh, well, yeah, I quit drinking the Dr. Peppers every day now.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't have to say a word about it.
Sure. Yep.
The problem is just, can you get somebody to stick with it long enough to have those things happen?
Right.
And it's, we generally say 3 weeks to form a habit and a year to make it a lifestyle. And,
Mm-hmm.
everybody wants everything
Yesterday.
instantly. Yep.
Yeah. Yeah. Being a human is a variable in and of itself. That's what I always think.
That's very true.
That's funny. It's when I talk through pain stuff, I'm like, I bet you wish this stopped hurting yesterday, and here we are. So let's just be here and take the next step.
Mm-hmm.
Cool. Well, what else should we talk about? We got a couple minutes left.
Might try out High Rocks.
Okay.
Did Otto talk about that at all? I haven't heard her podcast yet.
She mentioned it, just as like, hey, this might be my next adventure. But yeah, talk through that a little bit.
So yeah, she and some friends signed up after the games ended this year. So for those that don't know, she went to the CrossFit Games in September. And, after she finished, she had carpal tunnel surgery. And I think just was kind of looking around like, what's maybe something else to try for something fun.
Sure.
Focus on something different for a little bit. And I'm sure she'll come back to, I don't think CrossFit's going anywhere. But just looking for something different to do. And she and a few friends decided to do High Rocks, which it seems like nobody around here has heard of it. Seems to be big out east and like in Texas, California, like it's more popular.
And like Colorado,
yeah,
kind of that. Yep.
But it's kind of a similar idea to CrossFit, where they're trying to see, sort of like the sport of fitness, trying to see who's in the best shape, versus just a half marathon who's running the fastest, or powerlifting competition of who's the strongest. It's kind of a mix of all that stuff. So it's 8 different stations of sort of strength focused stuff. And then in between each one of those stations, you run a kilometer. So the whole thing takes hour and a half-ish or so, depending on wherever you're at. But she signed up for it, and I wasn't really thinking about doing anything with it. And then I mentioned it to a client who I thought it would be a better fit for him than CrossFit, just because he's got some range of motion issues and that kind of thing. And
Sure.
it wouldn't be as much of a issue to work with the high rocks stuff. And he started looking into it, kind of got excited about it. He's like, well, I'll do it if you do it.
Classic.
Man, give me one of those. And then I started looking at it, and I don't know. We'll see. I might do it.
Yeah. I've there's a couple people on Instagram that I follow that have been in the High Rocks world. And I think it's the guy that I'm thinking of, but he is... Have you looked at any of like the recent top finishers or anything like that?
I haven't gotten that deep into it.
Okay. Well, I think you'd appreciate this. Again, I think it's High Rocks. It might be a different one, but his like slogan is biceps win races.
Yeah.
And he's just this big old muscle dude, but he's just an animal. And I think...
Is it Hunter or something?
Yes.
Yeah. They invited him to do CrossFit Games one year, and he did pretty well in the CrossFit Games.
Yeah, I believe that. Yeah. Dude's an animal. And I've watched some of his training stuff, but he's just got the funniest personality because it's a race. And like, big lifter people, as soon as they hear the R words, are like, nah, it's not me.
Yep.
Unless it's a race to, 50 reps of bench press.
Yep.
And like, that's his thing. He goes, I'm just going to be an absolute tank of a human and still be able to like move. And so, yeah, that's funny.
Yeah.
Yeah, that'd be fun.
Yeah, I'm kind of, I don't know. I think I've been looking for something different to do, and that might be the next adventure here.
Sure. Yeah, that brings up one other topic, actually, that I was going to bring up, was like, if you find yourself, either personally or with your clients, like, going through seasons of stuff where... I think we all kind of have like a default of like, if I'm going to go to the gym today for an hour, then you can somewhat predict half the stuff that I'm going to do. And like, we get in a groove and we do the same things because they work, we know them, we're comfortable. And you do that for a certain amount of time. And then you kind of get to a point where it's like, I just need a little flair of something. And to me, I think for people on the outside looking in, they think like, man, if I go to the gym and I do the same stuff every day, that's going to be so boring. But they miss that there's so much more variety within it. And like from my own personal experience, like it just makes me think about sports and growing up and playing different sports in different seasons, and then going to college and like really focusing on one sport, but then still playing a different sport over the summer.
Sure.
And then like moving back to Mankato after doing CrossFit for a couple years and then deciding I'm going to run a marathon. Like going through those changes and transitions have been just a super fun adventure for me. So do you ever see that? Well, I mean, you just kind of described it with yourself of like looking for something different.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of go through the same cycles, and it's I feel like with clients, like personal training clients, most of my clients, I'd say, are coming to me because they'd have a hard time getting there on their own. And that's what I mean about, like, I think 90% of success with personal training is people show up. So they actually do the work, and then they see results over time. But I think, I've got some clients who train with me for a specific purpose, like to be a faster runner. I've got somebody training for a marathon right now.
Or the dancer that you're working with.
Yeah, she's been fun.
Super cool girl.
Like a high school football player or what. So you get people that are a little bit more specific performance oriented, but most of my folks are, if they weren't doing a session with me, they probably wouldn't be there. Right. So it's a little different from that perspective.
Sure.
And then there's still an element of I keep it different for them, right?
Yeah. Part of that is part of your job.
So that's, they certainly get bored doing the same thing over and over. So it's, that's where I come in to make it not the same all the time. And they say that pretty frequently, that, every once in a while I'll say, hey, so how'd you like that workout? Or is this cool stuff for you? Where he's like, oh, well, yeah, this is good, but I just like that it's not the same thing every time I come in,
Sure.
But with people that are a little bit more into it, like live and breathe fitness, I definitely see that quite a bit myself, for sure. There, I went through a running phase where I did, several half marathons. I never was a runner before that. I did a strongman once.
Running wise, not, I don't know if people can tell from the video, but you're a little taller and bigger than I am. Right? So people have this perception of big tall guys aren't going to run.
Sure. So I definitely got better. I'm not the best runner in the world.
Sure.
But kind of where I was going with this is, it was a process building that up, because I never was a runner through high school and college and any of that. And then, I don't know, one summer got the bug. I was like, okay, I'm going to do it. I need to be better at cardio stuff.
Sure.
So that was about 4 years there where I did a half marathon every year. I never did more than a half marathon. That was enough for me. But over the course of that, now I haven't run a half marathon in 12 years, probably, something like that, when we lived in DC. But I built that capacity, and that capacity is still with me. So now I can go run 3 miles, and yesterday I did 3 miles. I hadn't done 3 miles in months.
Yeah.
But it felt good. It was enjoyable, right? So, you kind of, for a while you focus on this, and then maybe you say, well, I'm going to go do something a little bit more. I did a strongman once. I did a Scottish Highland Games once, and, CrossFit's pretty strengthy and whatever. And you focus on the strength, and, and that stays with you. And it's, so you sort of end up building these different capacities when you choose something different to do, and you don't just do it and then totally lose all of it. You might not. I'm certainly not in as good a running shape as when I was training for half marathons, but I kept 90% of it.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. It's, I think some people get stuck on the, use it or lose it thing, and miss that, in the fitness training world, there's so much overlap that even if you don't do the thing specifically, as long as you stay active, you keep a big chunk of it. It's kind of what you're getting at. Where it's not a total loss, right? You think oh man, I stopped running, so now I'm going to lose that part. It's no, that's the beauty of the health investment. You get to carry a lot of that conditioning or skill with you, and you can dip back into it way faster than I think people realize.
Yeah, 100%. And there's definitely there's a huge difference between exercising and training.
Sure.
Sure. When I see people sign up for a marathon, sign up for a CrossFit competition, sign up for whatever physical thing that they want to do, the mindset and the intensity is much more focused versus going to the gym, going through the motions, doing your thing, and you certainly get benefit from that. But the rate at which people make progress changes just by signing up for something, because now they've got, I got to be able to do this by this time.
Right.
And I certainly see it with myself and see it with clients, and that's kind of fun to see.
It's kind of throwing that dart on the map of actually I'm gonna tell myself I'm gonna go there, so now I have to do it.
Yep.
Yeah, I'm in the process of finding 5 other really goofy-minded friends that want to do the Ragnar run from St. Paul to Duluth. And because I've had multiple patients run various versions of it in the past, and just you run from St. Paul to Duluth with a group of friends, and you're in a van, and you just
and you just go until you get
there.
Go.
Yeah. It's And that
I can
for
think of a
whatever-
couple people that would probably be into it.
Yeah, and you can either do a 12-person team or a 6-person team from what I've looked up. And if you do the 12-person team, everybody runs about 20 miles over like the 2-day span.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like 20 miles puts you in the ballpark of running a marathon. Cool. A number of the people that I've talked to have kind of checked that box already. So if you go like the 6-person team, then everybody's running 40-ish miles a weekend. Like that's a different ball game.
Yeah.
You gotta be a little sillier to do that. And the 4 guys that I've talked to have all kind of said like, I'm dumb enough to try that.
Sure.
That sounds fun. So
try anything twice.
Yeah, exactly. So that's on my training end of things, like that's possibly like the next cycle or the next loop of like working that in. And because like I ran the marathon in 2022. Yeah, I ran it while I was 30. Like that was my goal for whatever reason. But towards the last 2 weeks of marathon training, like my taper weeks, I got super sick and I lost like 15 pounds, which I don't recommend.
Yeah. Remember that now that you say that.
Yeah, and it was right after that, then I kind of went into just like health recovery mode. But then that's when I worked with you on the lifting program, because I was like, well, now I'm like a scrawny middle school kid again. I need to get my strength back and work through your program for a couple months. And like that was the best, most recent like strength chunk I had in a long time up to that.
You made a lot of progress in a short amount of time.
Yeah, super. And then I think it was that spring that you and I dominated our in-house CrossFit competition. Little podcast shout out to that.
Yep.
TJ and I are 1-0.
Yeah, that's right.
But for me, it was, even someone that has an academic background and has a history of different training things, I still find it so beneficial to like roll through those and understand from the beginning, okay, if I'm going to work with TJ on a program, I'm already going to put it in my head that this is a 3 to 4 month thing, regardless of what I do after that.
Sure.
And it's like you can block out a lot of the distraction once you just make that decision. And I think that's where people find some pretty cool gems when it comes to that stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And then, can go do the next thing, however that works.
Yeah.
So, I'm going to peek at our time. Cool. Well, that puts us at an hour-ish. Any other last comments for the people? Other than, like, where can people find you? How can people get connected with you?
Oh, I'm at maverick-fit.com. My email is just tj@maverick-fit.com. You can get me there. We're on Facebook and everything as well. It's probably the easiest.
Yeah. Facebook. Some Instagram stuff
Maverick
too.
Fitness Mankato on Facebook.
Yeah. Cool. Well, TJ, thank you for your time.
Oh, thank you.
It's a good time. And glad that you and I get to kind of work together through various things and whatnot. And I think that from a community standpoint in Mankato, like there's a lot of just good health, fitness people in our community.
There are, yeah.
And I think the biggest thing is just helping other people get connected to those sources, which is kind of a huge point of doing this and bringing you on. So appreciate it.
Oh, thank you very much.
Okay, cool. Well, that wraps it up. See you guys next time.
Yeah, thank you.